Emma Harrison froze, her application portfolio slipping from trembling fingers to scatter across the polished marble floor of Blackwell Industries' executive suite. Time seemed to suspend as the CEO's steel-grey eyes widened, meeting hers for a fraction of a second before shifting to the toddler straining against Emma's hip. Just minutes earlier, she had been rushing through downtown Chicago, the autumn wind biting through her worn coat as rain threatened overhead. The babysitter had cancelled last minute, again, leaving Emma with no choice but to bring 2-year-old Lily to the most important interview of her life. A prestigious internship at Blackwell Industries could change everything for them, providing the stability they desperately needed after 2 years of struggle since Lily's birth. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwell," Emma stammered, her cheeks burning as she bent to gather her fallen papers. "She's just in that phase where she calls every man—" But Alexander Blackwell wasn't listening. His normally commanding presence seemed to waver as he stared at Lily's cherubic face, her dark curls and striking blue eyes, eyes that mirrored his own with unsettling precision. "Leave us," he ordered the HR director who stood nearby, visibly uncomfortable. "Miss Harrison, please come into my office. Bring the child." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed him, clutching Lily tighter. This wasn't how she'd planned to make an impression. At 24, she'd spent the last 2 years balancing community college classes with part-time work, fighting her way toward a better life after being abandoned while pregnant. The internship application had been a long shot. She knew her resume couldn't compete with candidates from elite universities. But desperation had made her bold. Alexander Blackwell closed the heavy door behind them, gesturing toward a chair opposite his imposing desk. The corner office offered a sweeping view of Lake Michigan, the city's skyline stark against gray skies, worlds away from Emma's cramped studio apartment on the south side. "Your name again?" His voice was controlled, measured. "Emma Harrison, sir. I'm applying for the marketing internship." She shifted Lily on her lap, feeling increasingly out of place. "I apologize about bringing my daughter. My childcare fell through and I couldn't miss this opportunity." He didn't acknowledge her explanation, instead studying Lily with an intensity that made Emma instinctively protective. "And her name?" The question was soft but strained. "Lily. She's 2. A muscle twitched in his jaw. 2 years and how many months? The oddly specific question sent a chill down Emma's spine. "She'll be 2 years and 3 months next week." Alexander Blackwell turned abruptly to face the window, hands clasped behind his back. At 38, he was younger than most CEOs of companies this size, but his reputation for brilliance and ruthlessness preceded him. The business magazines called him Chicago's most eligible bachelor, though rumors of a broken engagement about 3 years ago occasionally surfaced in gossip columns. "Where is her father?" The blunt question stung. "Not in the picture, Mr. Blackwell." "That wasn't my question." Emma swallowed hard. "I don't know, sir. We met at a charity gala where I was working as a server. It was just one night. He gave me a fake name. When I found out I was pregnant, I had no way to contact him." Alexander turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Which gala?" "The Children's Hospital Benefit. December, almost 3 years ago." He sank into his chair, something flashing across his face. Recognition, perhaps. Impossible. The man she'd spent that night with had been charming, warm, nothing like the cold, calculating figure before her now. "You were wearing a black dress," he said quietly. "Your hair was up." Emma's breath caught. How could he possibly know that? Unless— "James," she whispered, the name he'd given her that night. "A middle name I rarely use." His gaze never left Lily, who had begun to squirm in Emma's arms, reaching curious fingers toward his desk. "I was in a different place then. The engagement had just ended. Badly." Emma's mind raced, pieces clicking into horrifying place. The way Lily's eyes matched his, the timing, the inexplicable attraction she'd felt that night to a stranger who'd seemed somehow familiar, his face occasionally glimpsed in business news segments she'd never paid much attention to. "This isn't possible," she murmured, though the evidence sat squirming on her lap. "DNA testing will confirm it," he said matter-of-factly. "Though I hardly think that's necessary looking at her. She has my mother's chin." His voice softened imperceptibly on these last words. "I didn't come here for this," Emma said, fighting to maintain composure. "I didn't know. I'm just here for the internship." "Which you're clearly unqualified for," he replied, picking up her portfolio and scanning it with critical eyes. Community college education, retail experience, no connections in the industry. The dismissal was a slap. Emma stood, pride overriding shock. "We'll go. I don't want anything from you. I've managed on my own for 2 years. We'll continue to do so." "Sit down, Miss Harrison." There was something new in his tone, not warmth exactly, but less ice. "I'm not finished." "I am. Thank you for your time." She turned toward the door, but his next words stopped her. "She called me Daddy." Emma turned back slowly. Alexander was now standing, hands flat on his desk, vulnerability briefly visible beneath his controlled exterior. "Children say things, Mr. Blackwell. It doesn't mean—" "I have no family left," he interrupted. "My parents died when I was in college. No siblings. I've built this company at the cost of everything else." His eyes met hers directly. "I never expected this." Lily chose that moment to squeal and point at a small crystal sculpture on his desk. "Pretty." Something in Alexander's expression shifted as he watched her. Wonder, perhaps, or fear. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Harrison, one that benefits us both. I'm not interested in hush money. That's not what I'm offering. I'm offering you the internship." Emma laughed bitterly. "Out of pity, no thank you." "Not pity. Strategy." He straightened. "You'll work directly under me. Learn the business from the inside. If what you say is true, that you had no idea who I was, then I need to understand exactly who you are before I determine how to proceed regarding Lily." "She's not a business problem to solve," Emma said sharply. "No, she's much more complicated." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And apparently, so are you. Few people would turn down any opportunity I offered. I'm not most people, clearly." He picked up his phone. "Janice, prepare an employment contract for Ms. Harrison, executive assistant intern position, effective immediately, and have the penthouse guest suite prepared." Emma's jaw dropped. "I'm not living here. The company maintains apartments for visiting executives. You'll stay there temporarily while we sort this out." His tone left no room for argument. "Unless you prefer I file for emergency custody today, my legal team is quite effective." The threat sent ice through her veins. "You wouldn't." His expression softened fractionally. "I don't want to. I'm trying to offer a reasonable transition, for all of us." Emma looked down at Lily, who was now contentedly playing with the button on her worn cardigan, blissfully unaware of how her innocent word had just changed everything. They had been struggling for so long. The apartment with the leaky ceiling, the irregular paychecks, the nights studying while Lily slept, fighting exhaustion. "1 month," she finally said. "We'll try this arrangement for 1 month. Then we renegotiate." Alexander nodded once, coming around the desk to stand before them. Up close, Emma could see lines of fatigue around his eyes that the magazines never captured. "Hello, Lily," he said softly, crouching to the toddler's eye level. Lily regarded him solemnly before breaking into a luminous smile. "Hi." And in that moment, Emma saw it, the first genuine emotion to cross Alexander Blackwell's face. Pure, undisguised wonder. Emma spent her first week at Blackwell Industries in a state of perpetual disbelief. The corporate apartment Alexander had arranged for them was larger than any place she'd ever lived. A 2-bedroom suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's glittering skyline. Lily had her own room for the first time, complete with a toddler bed that had mysteriously appeared the day after their arrival, along with a chest of age-appropriate toys. "How you didn't have to do this," Emma had said when she saw it. "It's practical," Alexander had replied, his expression unreadable. "She needs somewhere to sleep." Their working arrangement was equally surreal. As Alexander's executive assistant intern, Emma found herself thrown into the deep end of corporate operations. She shadowed him in meetings with international clients, took notes during board presentations, and was expected to understand complex business principles with minimal explanation. Alexander was a demanding boss, brilliant but exacting, with little patience for errors. "If you're going to be here, you might as well learn something useful," he'd told her on her second day, dropping a stack of financial reports on her desk. "Read these by tomorrow morning." She'd stayed up until 3 a.m., doing exactly that, determined not to give him any reason to question her capabilities. A company-approved nanny cared for Lily during working hours, bringing her to the office for lunch each day, a concession Emma had insisted upon. These midday breaks became the only peaceful moments in her otherwise chaotic schedule. though she often felt Alexander's gaze on them from across the executive lounge. He kept his distance from Lily, observing but rarely interacting. Emma couldn't decide if this stemmed from caution or disinterest. The DNA test he'd immediately arranged had confirmed what those matching blue eyes had already told them, but Alexander had said little about it since receiving the results, throwing himself even more intensely into work. On Friday afternoon of her first week, Emma was organizing Alexander's calendar when his private line rang. She'd been instructed never to answer it, but after 4 rings with no response from his office, she hesitantly picked up. "Alexander Blackwell's office." "Who is this?" demanded a sharp female voice. "Emma Harrison, Mr. Blackwell's assistant. He's currently in a meeting. May I take a message?" "Tell him his aunt called. Tell him I know about the child." The line went dead before Emma could respond. She sat frozen, the receiver still in her hand, until Alexander returned 20 minutes later. "There was a call," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "A woman claiming to be your aunt. She said she knows about Lily." Alexander's face hardened. "I don't have an aunt." "Then who?" "Vanessa Bradford," he said, jaw tight. "My ex-fiancée's mother, a board member and major shareholder." He checked his watch. "Go home early today. We'll be attending a dinner tomorrow night." The annual Blackwell Foundation Gala. Appropriate attire will be delivered to your apartment." "The nanny will stay with Lily." Emma stood, indignation rising. "First, you can't just command me to attend social functions outside of work hours. Second, I can dress myself." "Not for this you can't," he replied dismissively. "This is business, Emma. The Bradford family has been trying to gain controlling interest in my company for years. My broken engagement to Catherine was supposed to merge our family's holdings. They didn't take it well when I ended things. And now they know about Lily," Emma concluded, understanding dawning. "They'll use her against you somehow." Something like respect flickered across his face. "You catch on quickly. Why did you end the engagement?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Alexander's expression closed off immediately. "That's not relevant to your position here. It might be relevant to my daughter's future." "Our daughter," he corrected quietly, the words hanging between them like a physical presence. Emma softened. "I'm sorry. I'm still adjusting to that reality." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his immaculately styled hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. "The night we met. The gala. I'd ended things with Catherine that morning after discovering she'd been feeding corporate intelligence to her family's company. The engagement had been more strategic than passionate to begin with, but the betrayal," he shook his head. "I rarely drink. That night was an exception." "I remember," Emma said softly, recalling the intensity in his eyes as they'd talked for hours in a quiet corner of the ballroom. He'd been different then, unguarded, almost gentle, nothing like the stern CEO who now stood before her. "I didn't give you a fake name to be deceptive," he continued. "Everyone in business circles calls me Alexander. James is a family name I rarely use." "It doesn't matter now," Emma said, though somewhere deep down, it did. That night had meant something to her, even before its consequences had changed her life forever. "What matters is protecting Lily." Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. The car will pick you up." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. The dress that arrived the next day took Emma's breath away. A midnight blue gown with a modest neckline and an open back that flowed gracefully to the floor. It fit perfectly, as did the accompanying silver heels that probably cost more than her previous month's rent. She wondered briefly how Alexander knew her size, but decided not to dwell on it. When he arrived to escort her, Emma almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the severe business attire, replaced by an impeccably tailored tuxedo that softened his usual intimidating presence. For a moment, he looked more like the James she'd met 3 years ago. "You look," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd planned to say. "Appropriate, good." Emma might have laughed at his awkwardness if she weren't so nervous herself. The Blackwell Foundation Gala was held at the city's most exclusive hotel, its ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland, despite the autumn season outside. Emma recognized faces from television and business magazines, feeling increasingly out of place despite her designer attire. "Stay close," Alexander murmured as they entered, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of her back. "The Bradfords will be watching. What exactly am I supposed to do?" "Just be yourself." "That's disarming enough." Was that almost a compliment? They made it through cocktails and part of dinner with nothing more dramatic than curious glances and whispered conversations that faltered as they passed. Alexander introduced her simply as Emma Harrison, my new assistant, with no elaboration. She noticed how others deferred to him, their respect tinged with fear. It was during dessert that the confrontation came. A striking woman in her 50s approached their table, champagne flute in hand. Her smile didn't reach her calculating eyes. "Alexander, darling, how neglectful of you not to say hello." "Vanessa," his tone was glacial. "I assumed we had nothing to say to each other." On the contrary. Her gaze shifted to Emma, assessing and dismissive in the same glance. "Aren't you going to introduce your assistant?" The pause before the last word made its implication clear. Emma straightened her shoulders, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Emma Harrison, pleasure to meet you." Vanessa ignored the offered hand. "Tell me, does your daughter have Alexander's eyes? I hear the resemblance is quite striking." The nearby conversations quieted. Alexander stood slowly, his expression dangerous. "That's enough, Vanessa." "Is it? The board might be interested to know that the CEO they trust with their investments has been hiding an illegitimate child. One whose mother he's now installed in the company through a position she's clearly unqualified for." Emma felt the room's attention shift to her, judgment in every gaze. Heat climbed her neck as whispers erupted around them. "My personal life is not board business," Alexander said, voice low. "It is when it affects company reputation. Catherine was devastated when you discarded her. If she knew you'd already impregnated someone else, you need to stop talking, now." Alexander's control was visibly slipping. Emma stood unable to bear being discussed as if she weren't present. "Miss Bradford, with all due respect, you know nothing about me or my daughter. You're making assumptions based on gossip." "Am I wrong?" Vanessa challenged, eyes glittering with malice. Before Emma could respond, Alexander stepped between them, taking Emma's elbow gently but firmly. "We're leaving." The ride back to the apartment was silent, tension crackling between them. It wasn't until they were alone in the elevator that Alexander finally spoke. "I apologize for Vanessa's behavior. That was unacceptable." "Is that what you're worried about?" "My feelings." Emma laughed hollowly. "What about Lily? What happens when the board questions your judgment? When they start digging into my background? I didn't ask for any of this, Alexander." The elevator doors opened to her floor. Emma stepped out, but Alexander caught her wrist, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Emma, wait." She turned, suddenly exhausted. "What?" His carefully maintained facade cracked, showing a glimpse of vulnerability that stopped her retreat. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "Family, connection, it's been just me for so long." "That night at the gala," Emma said softly, "you told me about losing your parents. How alone you felt, even surrounded by success." Surprise flickered across his face. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about that night." The confession hung between them. "You were kind, thoughtful, nothing like I am now," he finished, releasing her wrist. "People change, Emma. Success requires sacrifice." "No, it doesn't. Not of everything human." For a moment she thought she'd gone too far. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed his face. "You really aren't afraid of me, are you?" "Should I be?" "Most people are." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, his gaze holding hers longer than necessary. "You're not?" The apartment door opened suddenly, the nanny appearing with the distressed Lily in her arms. "Miss Harrison, she's running a fever. It came on suddenly about an hour ago." All other concerns vanished as Emma rushed to take her daughter, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "She's burning up. We need to get her to a doctor." "I'll call my personal physician," Alexander said, already reaching for his phone. "That will take too long. She needs an emergency room now." Without hesitation, Alexander guided them back to the elevator. "My driver's still outside. We'll be there in 10 minutes." As the doors closed, Emma felt his hand on her shoulder, steadying, reassuring. In that moment she glimpsed again the man she'd met 3 years ago, and something shifted between them as they rushed toward the unknown together. 3 hours in the pediatric emergency room transformed Alexander Blackwell in ways Emma could never have anticipated. Gone was the commanding CEO, replaced by a man pacing anxiously in the sterile hallway, repeatedly checking his watch, not from impatience, but genuine concern. When the doctor finally confirmed Lily had nothing more serious than an ear infection that would respond well to antibiotics, the relief on Alexander's face was unmistakable. "I could have arranged a private doctor," he muttered as they waited for the prescription. "Sometimes the ordinary solution is the right one," Emma replied, cradling a drowsy Lily against her shoulder. "Being rich doesn't always change the fundamentals." Alexander considered this, then nodded slowly. "A perspective I likely need more often." By the time they returned to the apartment, Lily's fever had begun to subside. Emma settled her in bed, singing softly until the toddler drifted to sleep. When she emerged from the bedroom, she was surprised to find Alexander still there, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, as he worked on his laptop at the dining table. "You didn't have to stay," she said. He looked up, shadows under his eyes. "I wanted to be sure she was all right." "She is. Thanks to you getting us there so quickly." An awkward silence fell between them, a moment suspended between their professional relationship and something more personal neither was prepared to name. "I'll handle Vanessa," Alexander finally said, returning to safer territory. "She won't cause problems for you or Lily." "How?" She seemed quite determined. "I know things about the Bradford family they'd prefer remain private. Business is often about leverage." Emma frowned. "That sounds like blackmail." "I prefer to think of it as mutually assured destruction." He closed his laptop. "In any case, I've called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. I'll address the situation directly before rumors spread further." "And what exactly is the situation?" Emma asked, crossing her arms. Alexander met her gaze steadily. "That I have a daughter I recently discovered, and I intend to be part of her life. How that affects the company is irrelevant." The directness of his statement took Emma by surprise. "You barely know her." "I'd like to change that." His voice softened. "If you'll allow it." Emma sank into the chair across from him, the exhaustion of the evening catching up with her. "It's not about what I'll allow, Alexander. It's about what's best for Lily. She's not some corporate acquisition you can just decide to have." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I don't know what you're doing. One minute you're threatening custody battles, the next you're rushing us to the emergency room and looking at Lily like she's a miracle you never expected. Because she is." The simple admission hung between them. "Emma, I grew up with parents who saw me as nothing more than the future of Blackwell Industries. Success was the only option. Emotional attachment, a weakness. When they died, I inherited their company and their philosophy." He paused. "Until tonight, I didn't realize how much of it I'd internalized." "What changed tonight?" "When I saw Lily sick, I wasn't thinking about succession planning or public relations. I was just—" He seemed to struggle finding the words. "Scared for her." Emma's expression softened. "That's called being a parent. It's not a role I ever prepared for." "No one is ever really prepared," she admitted with a small smile. "You just do your best each day." Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at it, frowning, then silenced it. Work can wait. The gesture, small but significant, didn't escape Emma's notice. "Our month is half over," she said quietly. "We'll need to discuss what happens next soon." "Stay," he said, more command than request. Then, seeming to catch himself, he added, "Please, the position is beneficial for both of us, and for Lily." "Is it?" "Because right now it seems like we're caught in a power struggle between you and the Bradfords, with my daughter in the middle." "Our daughter," he corrected again, more gently this time, "and you're right. This isn't what I intended." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more approachable. "Perhaps we should start over." "What does that mean?" "Dinner. Tomorrow night. Just the three of us. No work, no Bradfords. Just getting to know each other." Emma studied him, trying to reconcile the cold executive with this man who now looked at her with something approaching vulnerability. "This isn't a business negotiation, Alexander." "I know. That's what makes it terrifying." The admission clearly cost him something. "I'm not good at this, Emma, relationships, family, but I want to try. For Lily, and—" He hesitated. "For you." Before Emma could respond, Lily's cry came from the bedroom. She rose immediately, but Alexander was already on his feet. "Let me?" he asked, uncertainty making it a question rather than his usual command. Emma nodded, following him into the darkened room where Lily sat up in her toddler bed, tears streaking her flushed cheeks. Alexander approached cautiously, kneeling beside the bed. "Hey there," he said softly. "Not feeling good?" Lily sniffled, regarding him with those identical blue eyes. Recognition dawned on her face. "Daddy?" she asked, the word that had started everything. Alexander froze, looking to Emma for guidance. "It's okay," she whispered. "If you want it to be." He turned back to Lily, gently brushing a curl from her forehead. "Yes," he said, voice uncharacteristically thick. "Daddy's here." Lily reached for him trustingly, and after only a moment's hesitation, Alexander gathered her into his arms, his large frame dwarfing her small one. Over Lily's head, his eyes met Emma's, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. The revelation in the society pages the following morning, complete with photos from the gala and speculation about Emma's background, suddenly seemed far less important than the genuine smile on Alexander's face as he held his daughter for the first time. 1 month turned into 3 as autumn faded into winter. The emergency board meeting Alexander had called ended with his unequivocal statement. Lily was his daughter, and anyone who had a problem with that could sell their shares immediately. Surprisingly, the business world largely applauded his directness, and Blackwell Industries stock rose 3 points that week. Vanessa Bradford resigned from the board the following day. Emma continued as Alexander's assistant, though her role evolved as he recognized her natural talent for marketing and consumer psychology. She found herself genuinely enjoying the work, applying her community college education in ways she never thought possible. For the first time, she was building a career, not just working jobs to survive. But the most profound change was in Alexander himself. The man who once scheduled meetings in 15-minute increments now regularly left the office by 6 to have dinner with Emma and Lily. The executive who had treated emotions as irrelevant began to smile, tentatively at first, then more freely. Board members who had worked with him for years commented on the transformation, though few knew its source. Their family dinners had become a nightly ritual. At first, they were awkward affairs, Alexander clearly uncertain how to interact with a toddler. But Lily, with a child's natural instinct, had sensed his desire to connect and responded with unconditional acceptance. "She has your determination," Emma observed one evening as they watched Lily stubbornly attempt to build a tower of blocks taller than herself. "She won't quit until she succeeds." "But she has your heart," Alexander replied softly. "That makes all the difference." They were careful with each other, neither willing to rush whatever was growing between them. Alexander had formally acknowledged paternity, setting up a trust for Lily's future, but Emma insisted on maintaining her independence, continuing to earn her own way. "I don't want her to grow up thinking money solves everything," she explained, when Alexander questioned why she wouldn't accept more financial support. "Neither do I," he admitted. "That was my childhood. Everything had a price tag, including affection." On a snowy December evening, exactly 1 year after they'd first met at the charity gala, Alexander invited Emma to dinner, just the two of them. The company's private dining room had been transformed with candles and white roses, Chicago's skyline glittering through the windows. "This feels suspiciously like a date," Emma said as he held her chair. That was the intention. Alexander poured champagne, his normally steady hand betraying a slight tremor. "I wanted to mark the anniversary." "You remember the exact date?" "I remember everything about that night," he said, echoing her words from months before. "It was the first time in years I felt seen, not as the CEO or the Blackwell heir, just as myself." Emma studied him across the table. "And who is that?" "The real Alexander Blackwell." He considered the question seriously. "I'm still figuring that out. For so long the company was everything. Success was the only metric that mattered." He met her gaze. "You and Lily changed that." "We didn't change you, Alexander. We just showed you there was more to life than balance sheets and quarterly reports." "Much more," he agreed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Emma, when you and Lily came into my life, however unconventionally, you forced me to confront how empty it had become. I had achievement without meaning, success without joy. And now? Now I understand what truly matters." His blue eyes, so like Lily's, held hers intently. Family, connection, love. The last word hung between them, neither acknowledging its weight until Emma squeezed his hand gently. "I was so angry at first, scared you'd try to take Lily, convinced you were the cold, calculating businessman everyone described." "I was," he admitted, "but not anymore. Not with you. They talked for hours, revisiting their first meeting, filling in the missing years. Alexander spoke of the loneliness that had driven him to achieve at any cost. Emma shared her struggles as a single mother, determined to create a better life. As the evening drew to a close, snow began to fall more heavily outside, blanketing the city in white. "Stay," Emma said as they stood to leave. "Not in the guest room tonight." His answer was a kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. It felt both familiar and entirely new, a reconnection and a beginning simultaneously. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Alexander traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Move in with me," he murmured. "Not the corporate apartment. My home. Both of you. That's a big step. We've been taking steps toward each other since the moment Lily called me Daddy in that conference room." He propped himself up on one elbow, his expression earnest in the dim light. "I love her, Emma. And I love you. I think I have since that first night, though I wasn't ready to recognize it then." Emma touched his face gently. "The man I met that night, I see him more clearly now. He was always there, just buried under expectations and responsibility." "You found him again?" "We did," she corrected. "Together." 3 months later, on a spring morning filled with promise, Alexander Blackwell, no longer Chicago's most eligible bachelor, watched as Emma walked toward him in a simple white dress, Lily skipping ahead, scattering rose petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The ceremony was small, attended only by close friends and trusted colleagues. No society photographers, no business connections, none of the trappings Alexander once would have considered essential. "Ready?" Emma asked, reaching his side. Alexander looked at the woman who had transformed his life with a single word from their daughter's lips, and felt a certainty he'd never known in business dealings or corporate acquisitions. "I've been ready since the moment you walked into my office," he replied, taking her hand. "I just didn't know it yet." As they exchanged vows with Lily, dancing impatiently around their feet, Alexander reflected on how completely his priorities had shifted. The company still mattered, but as a legacy to build for their daughter and perhaps future children, not as the cold measure of his worth. That evening, as they put Lily to bed together in their home, she looked up at them with those striking blue eyes that had first revealed their connection. "Story, Daddy?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Alexander smiled at Emma before turning back to their daughter. "Once upon a time," he began, "a very lucky man met a very special woman at a party. But he was silly and forgot to ask for her phone number." "That's us," Lily exclaimed delightedly, recognizing her favorite bedtime tale. "That's right," Emma agreed, leaning against Alexander's shoulder. "That's us." Later, watching the city lights from their bedroom, Alexander wrapped his arms around Emma from behind. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For giving me a chance to be more than my company. For showing me what family really means." Emma turned in his embrace. "Our story didn't exactly have a conventional beginning." "No," he agreed with a smile, "but it has a perfect middle. And the ending." He kissed her gently. "We're still writing that together."